Chapter 94, Sisters. Sisters. They left Diarna's keep the next morning in pretty much the same weather in which they had arrived, the rain clearing for a few hours over noon, only to start again as the sun began its descent before them, and they arrived in Athkatla on the evening soaked through, tired and low of spirits. Most of the city was quiet. Midwinter festivities were more subdued among the common folk, where Dead Winter Day was merely a sign of the hard times still to come, and most people kept to their homes and families. But when life was hard all year round, the people needed little excuse to find joy where they could, and the taverns of the slums were alive with light and noise, their first stop at the coronet yielding the predicted results as a mortified Hendak informed them the inn was full. He had immediately offered them use of his own room next to the kitchen's, but no one had wanted to turn him from his bed. Besides, a matter of a place to stay the night was not so much a problem for a group that counted 2 nobles of the city among its members. Valigar did not want to descend upon his own house. His servants would be celebrating and he did not want to ruin his young housekeeper's evening, Mab sure to fuss about not having prepared enough food or turned the beds. And so there had really been only one place left. The Dulrin estate was just as she had left it, an empty, decaying building, haunted by the ghostly outlines of sheet-draped furniture. Frithha stood listening to the rain drum on the tiles just above her, the droplets falling in a fine curtain across the overgrown garden to make the leaves sway, Frithha watching them dance from under the covered walkway that ran the length of small garth. The others were in the kitchen, the window on the western wall giving a glimpse into the warm yellow room where their shadows moved before the light of the newly lit fire, preparing where they would sleep the night. It would have been too much bother to arrange a room for each of them, the house all shut up as it had been, and with their bedding cleaned and dry from their stay at the keep, the kitchen would serve them well enough. Frithha let her eyes drift over the twilit garden, lush with grass that would have likely reached her knees, the dominant source of green beneath the flowerless bushes and leafless tree. Had it really been a month ago she had sat on that wall opposite and laughed with Inomen, brimful of an affection so long in the denying? She could barely recall the moment now, let alone the feeling. At least one of their company was enjoying the jungle, Boo scurrying through the long grass that bowed through the railings about her feet, Minsk assured enough by her presence and the closed nature of the garden to leave him to his own devices, the ranger in the kitchens with the others as they made their plans. Footsteps in the room behind her, Inomen appearing at the mouth of the deserted dining room wearing the same somber expression he had borne for days now, as though he was in a perpetual state of mourning.
Jahara and Ari are heading out to get something for dinner, is there anything in particular you would like?
No, thank you. He seemed to hesitate a moment, struggling with himself before he nodded once.
As you will it.
And he was gone. Frithha listened to the beat of his retreating footsteps until they were silenced by the slam of a distant door, and she was alone again with the pattering rain, well, almost. She glanced down as the tickle of whiskers brushed her wrist. Boo had climbed up to sit upon the railing, his once velvety fur spiked with rainwater, the ever-trembling nose twitching as he investigated her pale fingers.
Hello, Boo, how are things?
Why are you speaking to that rodent? Frithha shrugged.
Because
you don't want to speak to me.
I didn't say that,
she sighed, adding after a tired pause,
what do you want from me? Well, nothing really,
came a small voice. Frithha turned back to see Imoen stood before the dining room looking injured.
I can go if you want. No, I was
just ignoring me.
I'm not ignoring you. Yeah, all right,
snapped Imoen.
I never said you were. No, Imoen, I did not.
Suddenly, I'm not good enough company anymore, I've been replaced by rodents and friends who are too concerned with their own. Fritha drew a deep breath and exhaled slowly, trying to force the voice back as it ranted behind her eyes.
What is it, Imoen?
Imoen sighed, a hand absently rubbing the opposite forearm and looking uncharacteristically pensive as she offered,
I just wanted to talk to you. I know it was hard for you to be at Nalia's place and...
Yes, to which you lot made her go. I still cannot believe you gave in to them.
And I thought maybe...
Imoen glanced about her pointedly and Fritha understood. The girl worried she would find the memories of Anomen's house similarly distressing. Like you would care. They're all out for themselves. Even Nalia deserted you in the end.
That does not hurt anymore.
Imoen was frowning.
Well, that's something, I suppose, though I'm not sure if it's a good thing.
The girl took a step closer, leaning back against the railings next to her and letting Boo sniff at her fingers.
We'll be facing Bodhi soon, won't we?
She laughed uneasily.
I'm a bit nervous, to tell the truth, but excited too, you know? Because soon it will be back, and all the nightmares and the anger and this damn tiredness will go away and I'll be me again.
Oh good. There's something to look forward to.
Something to which we can look forward,
Fritha corrected with a sigh. Imoen gave another uneasy giggle.
Yeah, I'll drive them all mad, won't I? But for all that, I wish it was Irenicus we were facing, Fritha, I really do.
But not enough to let you stay in Suldanisseller and fetch him.
We will reach him soon enough.
Imoen was frowning again.
But will it be, Fritha? I'm worried. You said before that you weren't sure if you would be able to fight with us after this.
Oh, you'll fight, if I have to harangue you every damned step back to that city.
There is no need. I will fight.
Imoen smiled and nodded once.
Good, and I'll be there with you.
Words. That's all they ever give you. Just words.
And you give me something more, do you? Fritha.
Imoen reproached in injured tones.
I'll help. I'll fight with you. I'd have done it sooner if you hadn't been too caught up trying to face everything alone. No,
Listen to her. So ready to throw it all back in your face. Everything you sacrificed for them and it's still you playing the martyr.
And are you any better? You lie, you twist, I never should have listened to you.
I do what I do for us to survive. They don't care, they never did.
Just leave me alone.
A stifled sob next to her, Imoen looked like she was about to burst into tears.
You think it's all about you, don't you? Well, you aren't the only one this affected. You aren't the only one in pain or frightened. But fine, if you want to be alone, then go. Go be alone.
And the girl was gone, fled back into the house, her noisy sobbing silenced by the slam of a door.
Imoen.
I told why.
Don't even say it.
Fritha turned back to the garden. Boo had gone, startled by her scream. She could see the creature scuttling about the roots of the lemon tree. She lifted a hand from the railing, holding it out from under the eaves, the rain cool and pleasant as she caught it in her palm. It was time to get out of there. The rain hung in sheets across the docks, a constantly changing veil before her eyes, sometimes as fine as mist, other times driving into the worn cobbles to join the rivers already flowing there from the streets above. The docked ships and taverns both were all battened down and sealed against it, the harbor water seething as the droplets battered into the slow-moving swell. The place was dead, not a soul about, not even hers. Frithha had been drenched within moments of leaving the garden, not at a run as Imoen had, but a steady pace that had carried her ever since. She was so wet and numb now she hardly even noticed it anymore, her feet carrying her onward, unwavering in their path, and further down the street she could see the warm sandstone building, the golden brick all the richer for its varnish of water, the shrine to Ogma. It was closed, of course, the hour would have guaranteed such, even if the day had not. Frithha moved up the steps to stand under the cover of the narrow porch and stare blankly at the solid wooden door, imagining the quiet rows of books within, a fortress of solitude to replace the keep she long ago lost. She closed to it, laying her face against the rough, dry wood, a sudden desperate laughter bubbling up inside her as she began to pound upon the surface.
Sanctuary! Sanctuary!
No one came, there was no one to come, all the librarians and priests safe in their homes with their families and friends, celebrating the turning point of the winter. And Frithha was still laughing to herself as she turned to lean back against the unyielding wood, letting her knees buckle and her own weight pull her gently to the dusty tiles. Footsteps in the darkness, a shape emerging from the rain to shout up to her from the bottom of the steps.
By mask, are you all right, miss? You'll wake the dead with that racket. Would that I bloody could!
Frithha laughed bitterly, shifting to drop her head heavily into her hands. The figure approached, pulling back his hood once he was under the porch to reveal a worn, kind face topped with hair that was more grey than black, his blue eyes raking over her worriedly.
Here, Frithha, isn't it? I can recognize that hair even in this light.
Frithha snorted.
That hair, this hair. Bloody stuff's seen many a bounty hunter's mother weeping. Well, I wouldn't know about that,
he conceded warily.
It's Jacob, miss, do you recall me? We met, months past now, in the shrine to our Lord of Shadows.
And suddenly the image sparked behind her eyes, her smiling and embarrassed as she had been caught trying to wipe her nose on her sleeve after a good session spent knelt and howling before Mask's shrine in a vain hope the god would somehow protect her more faithful friend. Had it made a difference? She was not sure.
I remember, Jacob. Well, that's something, at least,
the man sighed, seemingly relieved.
Though I fear this shrine is a little more fussy about the hours they keep. Will you come with me back to the guild, miss? I've to make my prayers yet this eve, and don't like to leave you like this.
Frithha shrugged, he could have asked to lead her into the abyss and she doubted she would have protested.
I will come,
she sighed, heaving herself up to take the arm he proffered.
Only let our pace be slow, I have not been myself of late.
Jacob left her in the entrance hall, the man having a brief word with Myrtle before disappearing into the shrine, the merry blonde running a nervous eye over her bedraggled appearance but a moment later, she was leading her up the familiar creaking staircase to Renal's office. The old thief had clearly been expecting her, but even then his welcome was unusually anxious, the man on his feet and ushering her into the room, fussing about her in a way that reminded her strangely enough of dear old Beth.
Frithha, by mask, it is you. I scarce believed it even when, Myrtle, bring some tea, and perhaps a towel, as well.
He ordered briskly, taking Frith's sodden cloak from her shoulders to hang it steaming over the fireplace and gesturing to the cushions before his low desk.
Now, Frithha, what has happened? Jacob said he found you outside the shrine to Ogma like this. I just felt like a walk. You seem ill at ease, Renal. Surely, I have arrived here unannounced enough times before now.
The man attempted a weak laugh.
Yes, indeed, but never has it been more welcome. We had news your ship was scuttled by Sahuagin a day out of Brinlaw. Havarian said you and much of the crew were drowned despite his best efforts.
Fritha snorted darkly.
Yes, or perhaps that should be we survived despite Havarian's best efforts. He was in Irenicus's pay all along. Considering the sum I paid for my transport, I would have hoped you could have found someone who at least wasn't in the service of my enemy. In his service,
repeated Renal, weathered brow furrowed.
But how is that possible? Irenicus had a sister in this city who was making sure everything was running smoothly while he bided his time in imprisonment. You know her, Renal, would you like to make a guess?
The thief master looked grim.
Bodhi.
A silence descended as a light knock rattled the door, Myrtle entering with a smile and a tray of tea. A neat towel hung over one arm, the girl lingering to pour the cups and present the cloth to Fritha, before disappearing once more. Fritha rubbed the towel half-heartedly up over her wet hair to let it drape over her damp shoulders where her tunic and undershirt were both soaked through by now, despite her cloak. She hardly cared, the girl reaching for the cup before her, the tea hot enough that she could not taste that first sip, though she felt it warm all the way to her stomach like a liqueur as she swallowed to continue her tale.
So we arrive at Brinlaw and find all the cowled wizards dead or mad, and the asylum being run by none other than Irenicus and his blood-sucking sister. Imoen was but a part of their plans, apparently they had been awaiting my arrival for some time.
Renal's face was a picture of sober expectation.
What did they do to you?
Fritha drew another sip of tea and shook her head.
It does not matter, merely that when they were done, they skipped off leaving us for dead. That was their only mistake in an otherwise perfect plan, but I intend for them to regret it. I have pursued Bodhi back here with that very purpose.
After an evening of such shocks, Renal did not bother to hide his surprise.
Bodhi is within the city now. We believe so, and Imoen confirms it. She has a sense for the woman now. I assume the vampire has yet to make herself known.
Renal nodded.
That is so. She must be keeping her activities here low-key in order to avoid drawing any unwelcome attention. I must inform Aaron of this, he will no doubt wish to aid you in your hunt. But what of you, Fritha?
Renal pressed, as though the vampire's reappearance was mere inconvenience.
You look thin and you are unhappy.
He concluded with a troubled sigh.
I could tell in our final meeting before you left on the ship, very different from the young lady who would come and take tea with me every time she had some question about this foreign city in which she had found herself. These months have weighed heavily upon you.
Fritha shrugged, not entirely sure why he would care either way.
Yes, they have, but it will soon be over, one way or another. Isn't life funny?
She sighed, drawing another sip of tea, the woody flavor filling her mouth.
When I was in Baldur's Gate, everyone believed I was working for the Shadow Thieves, I was even due to be hanged for it. And now here I am taking tea with you.
Renal was shaking his head, lined face etched with an emotion she could not quite place.
Oh, Fritha, what are we going to do with you?
She snorted, a weak smile tugging at her lips.
A few days ago I would have said some strong poison would have been the most merciful option. But not now. I have so little left to lose, and now it is their plans that are almost at a close. Our roles are reversed and it will take some small satisfaction in being the one to ruin what has been so hard strived for.
She glanced up to find Renal watching her with the same unreadable look.
Am I so very different from the girl I was before?
He dipped his head for a sip of tea.
Yes and no. You lie well, Renal, and pleasantly too. That is twice now you have used the skill to aid me, though I do wonder why. You speak of my lie to the Shadow Master,
he confirmed, lowering his cup to face her once more.
Regarding the coin to be raised and your threats to ally with the vampires, you likely see the risk to me as greater than it actually was. I have been long enough in Aaron's service now, that he would know any falsehood would not have been told lightly. But yes, I did lie. Due, in part, to the Shadow Thief's deception, you were made an offer by the vampires that you were forced to refuse. I told you once before your morals would make a fool of you, Fritha. I decided it would not be the case then either.
Fritha watched him watch her. Her morals were certainly not something she had been given the luxury of worrying about for a while now, and she had a feeling he knew that, too.
You spared me little in the end, Renal, but I thank you for it all the same.
He nodded once, eyes still fixed upon her and holding an almost absent quality as he continued.
You know, Fritha, I never had a child of my own. I have always been too interested in my career and it seems a little late to begin now. But from the very moment I met you, I considered that if I had ever had a daughter, I would have liked very much for her to have turned out like you. I understand why you may think it, but I was not lying before. You are changed, yes, but I can see her in you still, the young lady who once so charmed me with her guileless determination. And if, at the end of this, you feel you have forgotten her, then come back here. We can take tea and talk, and I will endeavor to remind you.
Fritha dipped her face. She could not cry, but she felt embarrassed by the scant feelings he had stirred all the same.
Thank you, Renal. I should get back to the others, they will be worrying. As you say then,
he agreed, making to rise as she did and moving to fetch her cloak.
I will speak to Aaron and have a message sent over to. At which inn are you staying? No inn. We are at the Dulrin estate. Very good. Until the morrow then.
Fritha nodded, taking the cloak and turning to proffer the man a cheek to kiss in the traditional sign of respect between child and elder, the old man looking rather touched as he obliged her.
Be well, Fritha. Good night, Renal.
And she swung her cloak about her, and turned to head back out into the rain. Valigar hung back, trying to find a comfortable nook in which to stand, far back and out of the way from the press about the table, the warm kitchen clothes and stifling with them all crowded within. He had never been in a group of such drama before now, his old company comprised of strong, hard-willed people who would have likely preferred to explode in mage fire than burst into tears. Still he had never been in a group where a quarter of the members were soulless godchildren. He could understand it though, not that he was in any danger of joining Imoen, but their situation was stressful and that sort of life was disheartening. The constant fighting, not for any gain, but merely to prevent further loss. The knowledge that however hard they fought and well they succeeded, the best outcome they could hope for was one where things were merely returned to their broken beginnings. The flickering light of the lamps and hearth were bathing the room in a too yellow glow, giving the scene before him an artificial quality, as though he was watching a play. The far end of the table was piled with the rations Ari and Jahara had brought back, while Imoen was hunched over the other end, the good inch or so of mousy roots that lined her parting even more noticeable in the lamplight, the girl's speech stilled with tears as the others made to comfort her.
Come now, young Imoen, do not cry. Really, Imoen, I'm sure there is nothing to worry about. But she's been gone for hours.
Jahara was shaking her head.
There are many places in the city that could entertain her for this long. She's likely over at the theater.
But Imoen would not be comforted.
But why did I say that? I told her to go away. You were angry, Fritha will have understood. I was supposed to becoming a better person. And you are,
came a firm voice, Valigar more surprised than any of them to find it had been his.
Becoming such is not about never making mistakes, it is about recognizing when you have and vowing to do better.
Everyone was staring at him, even Imoen's tears halted as she goggled at this unprecedented show of concern. Valigar frowned and went back to his brooding. Imoen went back to her crying.
But what if it's too late now? What if she's done something stupid, what if she's... Do not say it,
Inomen cut in sharply,
she would not do that. How do you? Because if I thought there was any possibility I would be manacled to her wrist.
Imoen snorted wetly, laughing in spite of herself, her voice small as she offered,
I don't think she'd like that.
Inomen managed a weak smile.
No, I imagine she would not.
A silence descended over them, the stillness broken by the crackle of damp wood in the hearth and the scattered drum roll of rain on the small window. Ari glanced to Herr Dallas and drew a deep breath.
Well, I'm going to put some tea.
The shrill groan of the gate cut her off. Imoen's head whipped up.
Fritha!
A shrill chorus of shrieks as a half-dozen chairs scraped back, Imoen in the lead as she dashed from the room, Jaehaera and Inomen following quickly behind, and they came to the atrium to find the door already thrown wide on the rain-pelted courtyard, a small figure approaching through the darkness.
Fritha!
Cried Imoen, launching herself at the girl, any reply she could have made lost as Imoen engulfed her in an embrace before she had even reached the porch, Jaehaera fussing over them as she tried to get the pair back in the house.
By Sylvanus, come inside, both of you.
Imoen was still clinging to her friend, Fritha bearing the contact with the air of a very patient, though thoroughly displeased, cat, Jaehaera ushering them both through the doorway as Imoen chattered earnestly.
Oh, Fritha, I'm sorry. Those things I said. It is all right,
the girl forestalled quietly.
I should not have shouted, my mind was giving me no peace, my anger was at it, not you. You did nothing wrong.
Imoen looked like she was about to burst into tears all over again. Minsk shook his head, giving both girls a fond, if concerned, pat upon the shoulder.
There, little Imoen, Boo said not to worry. And young Fritha, I do not think you should be listening to that voice of yours.
An irony that was perhaps lost to the ranger, though Imoen snorted through her tears, Jaehaera gently easing her into the care of the ever-sympathetic Ari as they all made their way back into the kitchens, the druid scolding her errant charge as they went.
Look at you, Fritha, you're soaked through, where have you been? I went to speak to Renal of Bodhi. He has noticed no new activities since her return, so she must be lying low. Perhaps she is not here at all,
offered Valigar grimly. Imoen shook her head, still sniffing heartily as she confirmed,
no, she is here. I can feel it. Renal said he must speak to Aaron first, but he believes he can promise us allies in the coming confrontation. Oh!
Fritha continued, her voice bearing no inflection for this afterthought,
and Havarian told them we are all dead, so you may wish to inform those of the city who would care.
Valigar blinked, for a moment wondering if his servants would be celebrating the evening, or would he have visited there to reveal a scene of mourning, his house slowly being closed up as they searched for some far-removed relative to inherit the estate, the final end of the Korthala line. At the table, Ari looked similarly disturbed.
Oh, poor Uncle Quail, I hope he has not heard that. Do you wish to go now?
Asked Herr Dallas. The elf sighed and tiredly shook her head.
No, no, another night will make little difference after so long. Beside, Hendak had not heard anything, it is likely not common knowledge.
Jaehaera nodded, letting shrewd eyes flick between he and Anomen. Valigar shrugged.
It is as Aerie says.
The knight before him sighed heavily.
I will see them soon enough. Well, that is good,
said Jaehaera firmly as she turned her attention back to Fritha.
And allies now though we have, they will be of little use to us if you have to enter battle in an advanced state of pneumonia. Now, where did you leave your bag? You need to change out of those wet things.
Fritha turned from her, leaving the woman to her fussing, Anomen closing to her side as her eyes drifted over the table.
Now, you are returned, we can take supper. Are you hungry? I suppose. Is that lemon curd?
Anomen awoke with the dawn to find the rain had, at last, stopped, the small courtyard garden wet and lush under a wan blue canopy. There was little to be done while the others were still sleeping in the kitchens. The man moving upstairs to the washroom to quickly dress, and the day soon found him back out in the garden, his trousers soaked to the knees by the long grass as he dug about the raised beds, weeding for want of anything else to do, the air biting and fresh in his lungs. It felt pleasant to be doing something familial after so long spent fighting. The first of all Chirayak, the tulips would be coming up soon, so long as he managed to clear some room for them. His mother's love of gardening had given him enough knowledge of the subject to be able to ensure he was not tearing out any of her prized blooms, and there was quite a sizable pile of weeds growing on the wall next to him when the first of the others rose. And one by one they passed him on their way to the washroom, some, such as the tiefling, clearly amused, while Jaehaera mumbled something about the difference between weeds and flowers being wholly subjective before tramping after the giggling Aerie. Anomen leaned back, shielding his eyes from the bright sky as he tried to stretch the kinks from his back, so long hunched, leaving it stiff.
Exhausted already, priest?
And Anomen turned to find Valigar, his bow in hand, a slight smile softening the gruff words. Anomen just shrugged, sitting down on the low wall to watch the man string his bow and perform the stretches with which he seemed to greet each day.
Did I hear the door before?
Valigar rolled his shoulders and nodded, pulling his thick arms across his chest in an effort to waken the muscles.
That you did. A messenger arrived from the thieves. Aaron promises his aid and wishes to hold a meeting today. And what answer did Fritha give?
The ranger smiled.
None. Fritha is upstairs washing with Imoen. Jaehaera told the lad we would discuss matters and send arrangements for a meeting later. She knows we must approach your order before anything can be decided. And the cowled wizards,
Anomen reminded gravely. Valigar noted the intimation.
Yes. I cannot say such an association would please me, but too much is at stake now, and allies are allies.
The ranger planted his feet firmly and raised the bow, fingers hooked about the string as he drew it back, frowning slightly as he tested the tension and slowly released it once more.
It is no good, this bowstring has not been right since we were shipwrecked. I will have to go over to my estate and get another, and inform them I am not dead.
Anomen snorted humorlessly, Valigar raising the bow once more and whipping around as a shrill whistle of approval split the air, Imoen at the open window above them laughing wildly while Fritha stood at her side, pale and gaunt as a shade, even the copper of her hair seeming faded as she watched them with those near black eyes. Anomen sent her a smile. One step and she had moved back from the window and disappeared from view. With everyone finally risen and the bedding cleared away, the kitchens were serviceable again and all settled about the table to share the leftover food and make their plans. Fritha had already indicated she wished for as many allies as could be found for the coming battle, though for some, such a task was easier than others.
Well, there is no one in the city I can ask,
confessed Valigar.
If I had had more notice, I could have perhaps got a message to Sangita and the others left of my old company, though I would have been reluctant to involve them. They were skilled, but not for this kind of fight. It fine, Valigar,
Jahara assured him.
As for myself, I will try to make contact with the few harpers who no doubt remain in the city. This matter affects more than just the balance here and should be their concern. Your brothers may not be pleased at your return, good Jahara. Who says I should accompany you? As you will it, Minsk. Anomen, I assume you will be returning to the order.
Anomen nodded.
Yes, I am sure the prelate will wish to aid us against such an evil. Good, and, Frtha. I will be going to the council buildings to speak to the cowled wizards,
she answered before the question could be posed, Imoen hurriedly finishing a mouth of jamma bread to volunteer.
Me and Ariel come with you, make sure they're feeling helpful.
Valigar was already frowning.
I do not think one of your talents should be approaching the cowled ones with any antagonism.
Imoen snorted and took another bite of bread.
And what they going to do? Send me to Spellhold.
And so they disbanded. Frtha was the first to leave, Imoen, Ari and the tiefling with her, and Anomen left for the order soon afterwards. The hour was still early and the compound was deserted as he crossed the silent courtyard, many of the squires and knights who had not returned home for the midwinter feast all still abed, and he wondered if Sir Harn had arranged a celebration for them the evening before. Anomen stopped, memories of the previous gathering and how happy he had been making the hollow ache that now rested in his heart all the more noticeable. Prelate Wes-Allen was in his office though, the man greeting him with a gravity which suggested he knew the reason for his arrival, though Anomen was mistaken, perhaps the older man merely read it on his face. The order had apparently been informed by High Watcher Oisig that he was still among the living, the priest petitioning Helm for the insight at their request, though the resurgence of vampires in the city were seemingly still a revelation for the prelate.
Well,
Weslane sighed, thick grey brows threw low.
I will inform Sir Ryan and have a company of men assembled this morning. A grave evil such as this must be eliminated and soon. I assume you already have some plans to those ends. Frtha is arranging matters with the cowled wizards now. We will send news of a meeting place as soon as it has been decided, sir.
Wes-Allen nodded gravely.
We will attend. Ah, and there is the first bell.
He sent Anomen a fatherly smile.
They will be serving breakfast in the refectory soon. I am sure there are many there who would be glad to see you returned. My lord.
Anomen took his leave, but it was not to the refectory he headed, the idea of that room with its noise and questions too much to face just yet, and he left the order's compound for sustenance of another sort. Father Oisig did not ask him where he had been, merely expressed a gladness to have him returned before going back to his duties, the man subtly ushering some of the more curious acolytes before him, and Anomen spent the rest of the morning in the chapel, sometimes giving worship, other times just sitting enjoying the silence. He had been unable to pray in the underdark, and even once they had left, he had struggled to find the words from the emptiness within. But there, in the house of his God, it finally returned to him, the peace, the divine love for one whose very being steered the course of his life. His eyes were drawn unwillingly to his left and the alcoves that lined the sides of the chapel, where many treasures were displayed for the satisfaction of Helm and faithful alike. The marble woman stood there, a pale hand outstretched. Her face was unfocused at this angle and could have almost been beckoning to him. Anomen returned his attention forcibly to the altar and his worship, unwilling to let such memories cloud his heart and put a barrier again between himself and his faith, because much of the time it felt like it was all he had left. The bells of high sun were striking as he opened the door, Anomen closing it on the cheerful peals that rang over the city. The house was silent. He was likely the first to return. The man walking through into the kitchen, his shoulder sagging as he drew off his bag and dropped it heavily on the table, a bang from beneath and a loud curse making him start.
"Fritha!"
he exclaimed, as the girl emerged from the other side of the table, rubbing her head with a frown, and he closed to find her slowly sitting up from where she had been lain upon the long wooden bench.
"What were you doing?" "Sleeping. I was sat here and I was tired, so I lay down. How was the order?"
A gnome sighed, sinking into the nearest chair.
"The meeting went well. The prelate will send a company of knights to face this evil with us. You are here alone."
Fritha gave an indifferent nod.
"The others went to the circus after our meeting, so I came back here. I suppose you are the first to return." "A gnome."
She paused, a heavy silence billowing about them, her face dipped and frowning as she perhaps searched for the words.
"Nalya told me what you asked of her, that I be allowed to stay at the keep when you all return to Sultanaselar. I understand what you are trying to do, but it is not necessary. I will fight, if only to give back some of the pain I have been afforded."
A gnome swallowed dryly, her lust for revenge as sad as it was predictable.
"I see. You expected something else." She sighed, "A keen desire to live, perhaps? It is there a gnome, but I can barely feel it under all the anger, I can barely feel that under the great churning void."
She turned away.
"You cannot understand."
He smiled faintly.
"Oh, I do. It is the same feeling I get when I look at you."
And, for a moment, she was staring right at him, the first time since the asylum had destroyed what had been between them, her eyes alive and burning in that pale mask of a face.
"Hello? We're back."
And Fritha turned away as Imoen burst into the room, Ari and Herr Dallas trailing after her.
"And look who we found loitering outside the gates,"
she laughed, as Valigar made his state entrance. A gnome raised an eyebrow to the ranger.
"Loitering? Oh yes, and you should have heard the things he was shouting at the passing noble women. All right, pet, show us your ankle. Do you imagine you will still be this exuberant when we have finally retrieved your soul?"
The ranger questioned coolly.
"Oh no, I'll be much worse."
Imoen whipped back at the sound of the door.
"Ah, I bet that's Jahara in Minsk."
It was indeed, the pair thoughtful enough to have arrived with something for their noon meal, and everyone gathered about the table once more.
"Well,"
sighed Jahara, the woman laying down her knife, the piece of bread she had just buttered poised in her other hand,
"I spoke to Bernard at the coronet, but he was reluctant to give me any names of the new operatives in the city. He merely assured me he would pass the message on, and there was little more we could do. We went down to the docks to look into Galvary's old stronghold and see if the place was still in use, but it was deserted." "How could you tell?"
asked Ari.
"They could just not have answered."
Jahara sent a wry smile to the man next to her.
"Minsk was very insistent in his approach. The place was devoid of both people and goods, just that bedizened shell of a building. If there are harpers in the city, they are not in there."
Jahara sighed, seemingly both pleased and frustrated by this. She glanced about the rest of the table.
"I assume you fared better?"
Fritha answered for them.
"The order has promised knights for the task, and the cowled wizards were convinced to aid us as well. They are not usually concerned about revenge for comrades slain."
Valigar muttered his contempt.
"Such an organization, it is your comrades you must watch for." "Come now,"
countered Ari,
"they're hardly the red wizards of Thay."
After her imprisonment, Imoen was feeling less generous.
"Yeah? The only difference I can see is a better public image. That idiot in the group we first spoke to even had the nerve to try and imply that perhaps as an fugitive, I should be taken back into custody. Like they could have managed it. Suffice to say it did not come to that,
Herr Dallas added quickly.
Our raven convinced them to present us to Archmage Odella. She seemed reasonable enough during our meeting after the sphere, and she proved so again. Once she understood how Spellhold fell, it was agreed that such an act against them had to be seen to be punished. Then we went over to the circus. Uncle had been worried, but he hadn't heard we were dead, so that was something.
Ari turned to Valigar.
Had your servants heard anything? No, and I was hardly gone long by my own past actions, they were unconcerned. What of your friends?
Anomen blinked, suddenly realizing he had yet to even see them.
Well, many were still abed when I left the order.
A long pause, Jahara continuing stalwartly.
So, we have what allies we can assemble, now we must bring them together and decide upon a plan. Do we have a time?
Fritha nodded once.
Yes, and a place too. I will send the message out after lunch. We are to meet before the council building at Third Bells.
The room the cowled wizards had arranged looked to have been usually used as some sort of lecture hall, 4 tiers of benches and desks rising up about a semicircular stage, a huge blackboard covering the entire back wall, the surface stretching right up to the high ceiling, and clearly impossible to use outside of magical means. Anomen stood just off the central steps on the back row, the vantage allowing him to observe the room and its strange gathering of people at a distance, the mages, thieves, and knights all keeping to their own and casting the other groups furtive glances as they waited for the meeting to commence. Large white lamps hung overhead, the means by which they were lit undeterminable through the opaque glass globes, though Anomen suspected it was not a flame. They did not appear to be at their full brightness either, the wizards perhaps sensitive to the preferences of some of their new allies. Aaron has apparently been displeased that their meeting was to be held somewhere so open, and the company he had brought with him looked little happier, the thieves huddled in knots of 3s and 4s where the shadows were thickest, like students who did not wish to be called upon for an answer.
Anomen!
Came that familiar voice before him, and he looked down to see Simon, the young man's expression of hope opening to one of joy as he bounded up the steps, Eric just behind him.
Anomen! By dawn's light, it is good to see you.
The squire laughed, patting his back as he finally drew back from the fierce embrace.
We feared you dead when news of your ship reached us. The High Watcher assured us you lived yet, though it was little comfort when we knew not where you were. You have been in the city a day, yes? Why did you not seek us out sooner?
It was a good question. Anomen certainly felt better for seeing them, and he wondered why he had avoided it.
Forgive me, Simon, things have been a touch fraught since we returned to the city. Yes, this nest of vampires,
Eric confirmed gravely as they shook hands.
We had hoped we had seen the last of them when this guild war died down.
The young paladin sent a frown to the closest knot of thieves, as though he hoped to blame them for not dealing with the matter completely in the first instance. But mere undead hordes could not dampen Simon's good spirits.
Well, they will be dealt with soon enough. At the moment, I am interested in what you have been doing since we last spoke. We heard your ship was scuttled by the Sahuagin. How did you survive the wreck?
Anomen smiled weakly, it all sounded so absurd when he recounted it.
The creatures believed Fritha to be their fish god's divine champion. The act of sinking our ship was merely a means by which to secure her.
Simon gave a
ha!
of surprised laughter that Anomen felt in his ribcage.
Sweet sunrise, I could scarce believe it, yet here you are. And how is Fritha?
He continued, his manner more subdued, and they seemed to turn as one to look down to the girl, stood upon the stage in quiet talks with Wes Allen, Aaron, and Odella.
I took a moment to speak to her earlier. You'll forgive me, but she seems a little strained.
Anomen flushed.
She is not herself at the moment. This last month was something of a trial for her.
Simon sighed, sending the girl another sympathetic frown.
Ah, a shame, truly. Still, you are returned now, a little peace and some time with her friends will likely heal her ills.
Anomen opened his mouth, trying to force an answer past the yawning hole that had just opened inside, though he was almost instantly saved the effort.
Squire Simon.
His friend glanced back at the summons, an older man who Anomen recognized as Simon's knight, watching them from the row below with an expectant smile. Simon was instantly at attention.
Ah, I must go, but we will meet up later and you can tell me all of your travels.
Anomen watched him go, unwilling to turn and face the knowing eyes of the so far silent man still stood beside him. Eric always had been the sharpest of their three, saying little and noting all.
As Simon said, we spoke to Fritha earlier. Strained is not the word I would have used. At first, I wondered if she even recognized us.
Anomen sighed heavily.
Fritha. I have mentioned, I think, the mage who first took her and her companions prisoner after they left the gate. He had escaped by the time we had arrived at the asylum for her friend. We were captured. It seemed he had planned it all along. Irenicus, he stole her soul, Eric.
The paladin's expression was unreadable.
I see. Fritha took the loss very badly. I would like to blame it upon the darkness she houses, but I wonder if she was not equally tormented by her situation, so long struggling to bring her to no more than a death sentence. And your relationship? But another casualty in its wake. I am sorry, Anomen.
Anomen turned away, letting his gaze drift back to the girl below, stood between the paladin and the thief master, the martyr between the lion and the serpent.
Please, do not tell Simon, I just could not bear for him to know.
Eric said nothing, just nodded once and patted his shoulder. The lights above them dimmed, people instinctively moving to take their seats, Eric sinking into the place next to him.
It looks as though we are about to begin.
The meeting was little more than an exposition of what their four leaders had already decided. ARan had provided maps to Bodhi's stronghold, and though none knew the exact layout of what was within, they could estimate the complex from old maps of the crypts brought from the Lathandite's libraries, a spell of Odella's projecting the plans in glowing yellow lines upon the board behind her. The thieves had wanted to attack at night, arguing that knowledge of the daylight hemming the creatures in would make the battle all the fiercer. Nothing fought harder than a cornered animal. The wizards, too, seemed inclined towards this, but the prelate and Sir Ryan would not hear of any plans that could allow vampires to escape into the city, and in the end Fritha announced they would attack with the dawn, and that was the end of it. After that thorny issue had been settled, it was merely a matter of strategy and how they would hold key positions and move through the stronghold, Fritha stepping back to allow the more experienced among them devise their plan. And there was a growing sense of anticipation to the air as they finally left the council buildings with the dusk, their small group walking the short distance through the streets back to Anomen's estate. Perhaps it was just to cover up her nerves, or maybe it was the genuine excitement at being on the cusp of her recovery, but Imoen was brimful of exuberance, the girl at Fritha's arm and chattering merrily, seemingly ignoring the fact her friend could manage little more than a smile.
Soon's eyes, Fritha. Did you just spend those entire 4 months making the acquaintance of every good-looking man in
Fritha just shrugged.
Not that I was aware of. Are you blind? Simon was so handsome, and Caudrel too, oh, and Aaron Linvale. Linvale?
Interrupted Valigar, incredulity seemingly winning out over his usual stoicism. Imoen grinned.
Oh, you know, I think I like you even better with green eyes, Valigar.
If ever the ranger came close in his life to blushing, it was then. Herr Dallas sighed deeply and feigned a disconsolate swoon.
Such enthusiasm for every bird but those in your own flock, this drab sparrow feels quite overlooked.
Ari giggled, scooping an arm about his elbow.
Oh, Herr Dallas, you are always first in my eyes.
Imoen watched the pair with a misty-eyed smile.
Ah, so who's your second then, Ari? Imoen!
Cried the elf as the laughter erupted.
Well, this is very merry,
trilled that familiar girlish voice. Minsk bellowed the introductions.
Bodhi.
It was like a call to arms, every weapon suddenly drawn, Ari's staff casting them in a pale yellow halo as she readied her first spell. Fritha quirked the faintest smile.
Ah, how obliging of you, Bodhi, you've saved us a trip.
The vampire's mouth stretched back, her grin more grimace as her eyes scanned over the company that was so determined upon her demise.
Aha, how droll! I am glad to see you all in such good spirits, especially considering the circumstances. How did you find the Underdark, Fritha? It was a home away from home. A pity you were in such a rush to leave it, I did not have you down as one scared of the dark.
The vampire raised an eyebrow.
Another quip? Do you truly take it all in your stride, or is it simply that you do not care anymore?
Bodhi sent her a knowing look and, for the sheerest instant, there was a flicker of sympathy in her dead eyes as she offered quietly,
I recall what it was like, you know. But either way.
She sighed, her coolly arrogant self once more.
You are becoming an impressive pest, and one I am finding it increasingly difficult to ignore.
Fritha merely smiled again, the mask unwavering.
Give me time, Bodhi, and you will soon find it impossible. Bold words, as ever. Regardless, I have not the time to stand here discussing what you will or will not do. I know you mean to strike at me, but do you truly realize the consequences of such an action? I understand what will happen if I do not. Do you really?
The vampire purred, a genuine smile lighting her face.
A reminder then, perhaps, of what you still stand to lose, should you pursue this course. Accept your lives, shortened as they are, and lead not others to the same ruin.
Bodhi vanished in a swirl of blue-black before any move could be made against her, the group slowly returning weapons to their sheaths. Imoen snorted, disappointedly letting the spell fizzle in her hands.
Well, that was all very frightening. I don't know about you lot, but I feel suitably warned off. Wait,
snapped Fritha, casting sharply about them.
Where is Anomen? What?
Cried Jahara, whipping back to where he had once stood so solidly behind her.
She took Anomen. By Berver, we have to do something. But Anomen?
Repeated Imoen, as though she could not believe anyone would go to the trouble.
Why?
Fritha was rubbing her forehead with the heel of her hand, her eyes closed behind the gesture.
She said she liked him, remember, back in the asylum, when it looked as though I liked him too.
Imoen gave a burst of nervous laughter.
Gods, Bodhi's a bit behind on the plot, isn't she?
Fritha dropped her hand, her face suddenly set with a cold anger.
Bastard! Right, back to the council buildings, we'll catch who we can and have messages sent out to the others, we attack within the hour. And what of the dawn?
Asked Valigar, as they turned to set out again, the man always to be relied upon to voice the questions no one else could.
Anomen would not want us to endanger the city for his sake.
Fritha snorted darkly, leading them back through the empty streets at furious pace.
It is not going to be a problem, because we are going to leave no one alive. That bitch thinks she can manipulate me. I would have killed her for the assumption, were she not already marked for death.
Chihiro was certainly not the only one among them looking worried.
Fritha, calm yourself. You cannot let this anger rule you. Yeah, you're getting Herr Dallas all hot and bothered for a start.
End of chapter.